and then we get there. So say that, let's open our meeting. Let's close our eyes, calm our mind, try to be here to connect with the spirit, the good spirit that prepared this ambience for us and said, God in heaven, please be with us in this beautiful morning, Sunday, to help us to understand the study, the message that our friend David will bring to us. Please, let us open our eyes, but most importantly, open our heart to help us to be better day by day. So be it. Amen. David, please.
So good morning, everyone. It's great to be back here at our centre. Please bear with me. This is the first time I've given a talk here for, 3.5 years or more. So I'm a little rusty. Bear with me. But the topic I'm bringing today, evidence for reincarnation, it sort of hopefully complements what Andrea did a couple of weeks ago. She talked about the values and the morality of the reincarnation process. But me being very much a scientist, I'm approaching it from a slightly different angle, right? And it reflects basically on my journey into Spiritism. I was born in England to a family who were not very religious. My mother did go to Methodist church and forced me to go until I was sort of old enough to resist the temptation, or have enough strength to say, no, I'm not going. I don't like it anymore. My father was a bit of a, I think, agnostic, if not atheist. And I spent most of my life really without any religion in my life. Occasions I came across friends, and it wasn't apathy or complacency. It was just that I just could not connect with what I was, what religion was shown to me. The concepts of heaven and hell, and all the hypocrisy that one still sees today in the religious orders. But late on in life, when you start to see, well, this body of mine is not going to last any longer, and you start to look for some spiritual guidance, I eventually I was asked to come to try conscious living. There we go. I should also mention, thank you for the people at home who are watching this. I believe we got success right with this StreamYard, so that's good news. So eventually, as I came along to the Spiritist Center, Conscious Living, where it was on 123rd Street or 25th Street, whatever it was. And initially, I was very apprehensive. I listened to some very knowledgeable people, Susanna and others that's obviously much more knowledgeable about the subject, but much more intelligent. And I thought, well, there must be something in this. And after a while, I got more and more involved. I still remember the days you used to be in a little room at the back and have these crazy passes and thought, well, this is a bit weird, but it's part of the process. And later on, I realized more about what that all meant. So I got more and more into Spiritism. And one of the pivotal moments was when actually Daniela Sissi came to the center and gave a talk on reincarnation, talked a lot about Kardec. And he introduced me to some concept that really was a turning point in my journey, as it were. So one of the things I distinctly remember is the way he referred to God. He always called God as the grand old dude. And to me, that was a nice shift. It destigmatized this idea of what God was. And slowly but surely, I studied more and more. And following on from what Daniel said, he talked a lot about the scientific evidence, or the empirical evidence of reincarnation, okay, and also the existence of the spiritual world. So this is the basis for my talk today. So one thing is always very challenging, I find, when someone comes up here to talk. We're talking to Spiritists who maybe were born into a Spiritist family, and others who, maybe as I was 10 years ago, very new to Spiritism. Can I just have a quick survey here? Anybody born into a Spiritist family? One. Okay. Anybody who's been in Spiritism more than 10 years? Quite a few. So that's good. Anybody completely new to Spiritism? Good. So that makes it easier. Okay. I hope I can trying to reach out to all the different knowledge levels and interests. So that's where I'm coming from today. And I'm going to start off with the objectives. Basically, what I want to show you is the evidence as I see it. Okay. I'm trying to bring you a lot of scientific facts, a lot of references. So hopefully, motivate you if you had doubts to say, oh, well, that's interesting. I can follow up with that. And at the end, I'm going to pass around a paper, and you can write down your email. I'll send you an email with all the links of some of the material I've got here today, because maybe some of them will be interest to you, and having an email just to click on is much easier. So the information sources I'm using are from Genesis. Genesis is, I'm sure you all know, is the fifth book of Kardec's 5 books, most scientific. In fact, we're studying this on a Sunday morning. We have a group we've been going for, well, we start off with other books, but on Genesis, we're almost coming up to a year and a half now. We're up to chapter 11, which is spiritual Genesis, and that's just some of the references I'm going to use in the talk today. And also this amazing book by Gianna De Angelis, channeled through Divaldo Franco. This is, I find, one of the most amazing books in that it is so current. He talks about cloning, about abortion, topics that are really paramount today in our society today. So it brings it from, Kardec and then Chico to today. And it's very, very interesting. And there's a particular chapter, number 21, Inglorious Days. It's called Brief Essay on Reincarnation. And I've taken some of the information from that. But most of the information I've got today is actually just from the internet. If you search on the internet, there is so much wealth of information. And sometimes it's not good information, but being selective, you can find a lot of topics that, I say, give evidence to this whole concept of reincarnation. So the topics I'm going to cover today, I'm going to start off with the historical perspective on the belief in the afterlife. And this is taken, I'm going to quote a few paragraphs from Gianna De Angelis on this. But it's been well known in all cultures and all cultures and regions of the planet Earth and times that there's this belief in the afterlife. I'm then going to go on to past life memories in young children. This is a topic that's been studied and information has been collected now for more than 50 years. Huge wealth of information on memories in young children. Now, not all young children have memories of past lives, but some, particularly those who have a traumatic death in the previous life, it spills over into their subconscious. And as a child is often more freer and can communicate things that are quite amazing when you see some of these stories. Even when a child passes on and we get older, we still have subconsciously memories of our past lives. And although, and I'm sure Andrea talked about this, one of the beauties of reincarnation is we lose our memories of past lives. We only bring with us the intelligence and our moral progression. But sometimes deep inside our memory are, again, mainly traumatic experiences. And some people have really great difficulty performing in life because of this past memory that's there. You don't know why they can't access it, can't process it. But there are techniques now, established medical techniques that can help people with those sort of issues and problems. Moving on, near-death experiences. Again, this is getting an area which is much more well accepted now in the medical community. It's partly because the number of cases of near-death experiences are increasing enormously, and partly because of that is because of the means of resuscitating people who have heart attacks or cardiac arrest. So that opens up the door to more people having this opportunity, sharing their experiences, and so on. Out-of-body experiences is something that's also one of the characteristics of near death. But there's other cases of patients who've been on the operating room table, have a medical emergency. The person remembers coming out of the body, can even relate things like a nurse dropping some tools and then relating that afterwards. And these are well documented evidences of out-of-body experiences. A little bit about nature and nurture. What I find fascinating is that we're born from the DNA pool of our mother and father, and we're most of us are brought up by those same two loving parents. But yet, siblings can come into a family life with total different personalities, right? Different aptitudes, different abilities. Where does that come from? We're coming from that same pool of DNA, the same loving environment, yet personalities are so different. I've got 2 grandchildren in Australia, who I don't see very often, unfortunately, it's a long way. But they have totally different personalities. Both beautiful kids, but difference, and where is that from? Moving on, child prodigies. This is something that, again, is very well documented. You can do a search on the internet and find hundreds of children that can play the piano from the age of 2, play the violin, how to get a master's degree in the teens, and so on. And that's been happening throughout the centuries. Okay. And then we'll go into societal progress. Maybe in today's world, it's a little difficult to comprehend what is happening, But if you look back over a longer time frame, thousands of years, human society has advanced enormously. Why? Because we're accumulating these experiences, we're coming back reincarnated. And again, it all adds evidence to this concept of reincarnation and a spiritual world. And last but not least, and perhaps most demonstrative of this subject, is the mediumistic communications. I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 great mediums we all know and what they've brought to us. Okay, so I'm going to start off by reading. This is the opening of this chapter 21 of Glorious Days. Anna, could you read for me, please? Do you mind?
As far as humans are able to remember, evidence about the immortality of the soul and reincarnation is present in almost all peoples, cultures, ethnicities, and social groups, constituting one of the oldest demonstrations about the reality of beings, which are not just purely circumscribed to a clump of cells and cartilage in their molecular conformation.
So, the last part of that is saying, well, it's not just material, right? There's something else. It's been in the cultures of all societies for long periods of time and so on. You carry on, Anna, if you would, please.
Walking alongside human progress and emerging at the precise moment when human thought appeared, this knowledge has advanced across millennia, inciting reflection and guiding people in the direction of higher goals that would free them from their primitive condition.
Just a little bit more.
Step by step, the spirit climbs towards its glorious destination. This saga, the knowledge of eternal values, is the result of the inspiration that the immortals always gave to their peers on earth. Through spirit communications, we were taught about life before and after the phenomena of birth and death, giving rise to the evolutionary mechanism in a constant come and go, thanks to which course matter can release an angel by way of reincarnation.
So this is a beautiful passage from Joanna that really talks about the philosophical side of spiritism, right? It answers those existential questions of where do we come from, why are we here, what happens when we die, and it really does make sense, okay? But again, can we get some more evidence and proof? So that's what we're going to go on to now. So we're going to start off with past lives, memory, and young children. As I mentioned earlier, in the University of Virginia, there's a division of perceptual studies. It's been founded more than 50 years ago, And it's in part of the Faculty of Medicine. So it's an accepted department within a Faculty of Medicine of a very famous university. It's very, very well known for its medical college. Originally it's founded by this Dr. Ian Stevenson. And then it was later when he retired and he passed away about in the early this part of this century. Bruce Grayson, who is specifically working on near-death experiences, and we'll come on to that afterwards. But they were founded, had a lot of money, fortunately, from, there was a friend of Ian Stevenson who happened to create Xerox, who gave him money and then donated on his death, all his estate went to this university for this department. It's been very active over these 50 years. They talk about their mission as being the rigorous evaluation of empirical evidence for exceptional human experiences and capacities, bear on whether mind and brain are distinct, inseparable, or whether consciousness survives physical death. This is one of what they call the hard question in science today. Is the consciousness, is the mind, is it part of the brain? Is it purely the brain, or is it separate, something else? And again, hopefully through this study today I'm sharing with you, I think it's getting clearer and clearer that it's something else. And many, many scientists now are coming to grips with that. So the university, they've documented over 3,000 cases of young children that through conversations when they're old enough to start to communicate with their parents, said, oh, but my real mother lived in this place, or I remember that. And these have been well documented. Interestingly, there's over at least 200 cases with birth defects, children with birth defects. And when they start talking about their previous life, they remembered a very traumatic death. One child had, for instance, gunshot scars. Young child born with scarring on his chest, and in the previous life he was shot. Another, for instance, were an agricultural, I don't know, combined harvest or whatever it was at that time, but with a huge scar on the head of this little girl, and she remembered her previous death. The Journal of the Medical Association of America, they studied that, all these materials of Ian Stevenson, and they say it's painstaking and emotional collection of cases that were difficult to explain on any other assumption other than reincarnation. So it's a body of knowledge. I think, again, it's evidence. As such, is it proof? No. But when you add up all these other evidences, collectively, I think, for me, it's proof. There are, of course, skeptics and critics. One of the, in early days, Ian Stevenson did most of his work in Sri Lanka, which is very much a Hindu country, a religion that really believes in reincarnation, not quite aligned with the spiritist concept of reincarnation, because you can be reincarnated in an animal. But so why did he choose that area? You know, maybe the culture and the belief system influence some of the answers he got in when he included his children. What I find interesting as well, though, is there was recently a YouTube video, and I can give you the link afterwards, where the top members of this department of perceptual studies talked about all this 50 years of information. What I find is they don't ask the why. You're collecting this as proof, you know, there is past life memories, but why, you know? And of course, I wish I knew Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker. I can give him, you know, read the spiritist literature. This will tell you why, you know? Okay. There's one case came to light about 18 years ago now. I think James Leninger. Anybody heard of this particular boy? But it's, yeah, Terry. It's an amazing story, and it was documented on 60 Minutes, ABC 60 Minutes. And it's about this young kid who was born when he was age of 2. He started having nightmares, got worse and worse. Wow, there's an old friend. So eventually got to the point where this child was getting so traumatized with these nightmares and other anger and so forth that they called for help with Carol Bowman, who's a child psychiatrist, sorry. And she had worked with other children, and she'd worked with children. She determined that she thought the problem was a past life memory. Now the parents were very, very educated, particularly the father. The mother was Catholic, father was, I think, also Catholic, but he was very skeptical of reincarnation. But the story went on, and as James became old enough to be able to communicate and talk and explain, it was apparently he had this obsession with planes and flying. And during some of the discussions, when he started to come up with ornithological terms, like there's a drop box, or not drop box, drop bomb, and other terms that the parents had never heard of, they'd never been exposed to. With this child talking more and more, he talked about the Corsair he was flying. He talked about the ship, the aircraft carrier, and the place in Japan where he was shot down. Okay, and the father got less and less skeptical, and he started to pull this information together, and eventually was able to trace the co-pilot who was still living, trace the sister of the one that was shot down. Okay, so basically James was a reincarnation of James Houston, who was a pilot who was shot down. And through the therapy, through these discussions, he actually went back and brought the child to his previous life's sister, and he was able to recall things about the family that the sister had forgotten. And this was on spontaneous 4 or 5-year-old. And at the end of the story, they actually flew out to Japan. They went out in a boat, and then the kid said, "No, this is where I was shot down." And they threw flowers into the ocean, and the kid just broke down in tears. And then, slowly but surely, he came to a normal life. He's now in finishing college, no memories anymore. I mean, obviously, he remembers the material that was published, and his father actually put a book together. So, again, some people use that as a reason that this whole thing was invented. He would have to financial ends, financial rewards. But again, I think this is a very, and I'll give you the link again afterwards, but it's an amazing 15, 20-minute interview video, all this information is brought up. Okay, so we're now going through past life regression. So as young children have these memories, adults also have more repressed, more deep into the subconscious. And Brian Weiss, who's a prominent psychiatrist, Yale and Harvard educated, his did more. Eventually, he ended up with now with a professor of psychiatry, University of Miami, connected with Mount Sinai. And this book, Many Lives, Many Masters, and he's written more books since. This is maybe 15 years ago now. True story of a prominent psychiatrist, his young patient, and the past life therapy that changed both their lives. And he prefaces the book by saying, "I know there is a reason for everything. Perhaps at the moment an event occurs, we have neither the insight nor the foresight to comprehend the reason, but with time and patience it will come to light." And so it was with Catherine. So Catherine was she was actually working at the hospital, and she started having lots of trauma, lots of nightmares about water, about the dark, about dying. And she was referred to by one of his fellow physicians. He didn't follow it up, and then one day this fellow physician saw Catherine again. She was getting worse. She insisted to go to see Brian Weiss, and he started his normal. Even though he had all these responsibilities as the head of the department, he would see periodically patients just for a one-on-one therapy, psychotherapy, and if necessary, even medications and so on. And he felt, there's something in Catherine's childhood, tried the conventional, traditional psychotherapy techniques, but after 18 months, he wasn't getting anywhere, and they were getting worse. So one day he was very able with hypnosis, and he decided to try hypnosis with her, and put her into a trance, and she really went into a deep trance. He kept going back and back. Do you remember this in your childhood? When you were 2? And then suddenly she flipped, and she said, "What I'm dressed in, where I am," very clearly, precisely. Anyway, so over more hypnosis, more sessions, he went back and back and back until one day she came out and said, I'm drowning. The torrential torrent of rain, the water's coming. I've got my child, and they both die. And then from that moment on, things started to improve with her. She dug up this past memory of a past life death. But what really shook Brian Weiss is that one day in this therapy sessions, she said, "Oh, by the way, there's someone here who wants to talk to you. It's your son. He wants you to know." I'm still getting goosebumps now when I tell this. "I want you to know that I'm happy, I'm well, don't worry." And Brian Weiss was just totally, what, he never, this lady was very authentic. There was she wasn't doing any research behind. his back or anything like that. It was purely spontaneous. And it was basically had a child of 10 years old that died. And she brought spiritual messages from the spirit world to him. So again, Brian Weiss now has done more than 4,000 regressions. Again, past life regression is not something that's recommended. It's not something we should do for curiosity. But there are certain cases where a past life trauma is so great that it impacts your ability to function and get the most out of this incarnation, should we say. So he now teaches psychiatrists, therapists with the technique of how to guide the hypnosis through and help other patients. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what reincarnation is from a spiritual perspective. This is a very much abbreviated and probably well lacking and in depth but it's the idea of the reincarnation process. It starts at the moment of conception, continues through gestation, when the action of the spirit through the perispirit, and I think most of us, I'm sure all of us know about perispirit, right? Molds the body. So the perispirit is involved in developing the body, affects the DNA, and help guide, should we say. And at birth, awareness of the previous life is lost, and that's a blessing. We don't want to come to this life thinking, oh, I did that in the past life, I murdered my wife, in the past existence. But there is still this deep subconscious memory, okay? We bring our intelligence, we bring our moral advancement, but we don't bring the details of what happened in past lives. But they're somewhere hidden. Some vestiges of memories of a past life or lives are still accessible during early childhood and continue until the beginning of adolescence, when the complementary characteristics are set in. This last quote here from Joanna de Angelis, again in this book, at the end of the chapter. So again, you don't just reincarnate and boom, it's black and white. You've forgot that past life, you've got a new one now. No, there's an overlap, and there's a time period of involvement until eventually, when you reach adolescence and your free will is greater, probably the sexual motivations of free will and so on kick in, and really you lose, at least subconsciously, any vestiges of past life memories. Near-death experiences. This, again, I was saying earlier, near-death experiences by people who have come close to dying, obviously didn't die, who later have a memory of events. It include a few of the following. And these are some of the characteristics, okay? Awareness of being dead. Sometimes they're separate, as I said earlier. You get an out-of-body experience, you can see the body. Generally, they're very positive. The people who have had past life, out-of-body, near-death experiences, remember it as a very positive event. Moving through a tunnel, big light at the end of the tunnel, that's a common characteristic of a lot of these people who've related these experiences after they came back to life. Increased sensations of colors and smells, and celestial landscape. And this is also very common as well, meeting with deceased people. Sometimes they talk about meeting the grandmother or even the mother who died previously. And a life review, okay, during that time. And sometimes it may seem like to some of these experiences, it seemed like hours. And in reality, there were only maybe minutes, So very interesting. Just a few more conclusions about near-death experiences. Most cases occur in resuscitated cardiac arrest patients. Now, when you have a cardiac arrest, within minutes, you don't get that oxygen flow to your brain shuts down, and basically, the chances of recovery. But these day and age, the medical procedures have advanced a lot. I mean, not just because we have defibrillators now in airplanes and in other places, but the way of cooling the body down. There's ways of, there's been people who have literally died clinically for over an hour. There was an English footballer who collapsed on the field, and it took an hour and I think 72 minutes to resuscitate him. And he came back with all his faculties. He didn't play football again, but he came back with these faculties. Also, in the World Cup, Christian Eriksen was in Denmark. He played in the European Championships 2.5 years ago, and he collapsed. He wasn't near the ball. He wasn't near another player. He just collapsed in front of 80,000 people. And they got the defibrillator there, got him to the hospital very quickly. Within a week, he was talking with his colleagues, and he's actually playing for Denmark in the World Cup today. Well, not today, but in this World Cup, with a pacemaker, with his back playing football again. About 10% of patients have NDEs, so not all patients have them, but still 10% is quite a high proportion. And the medical profession really now accept NDEs as it's a normal procedure in hospital that anybody who comes in this sort of situation, had a heart attack, they were resuscitated, they apply after a questionnaire about what was your experience, and these are sent back to an organization which I'm going to talk about here. Again, I just already mentioned the improvements in life-saving procedures have increased the number of people with cardiac arrest and hence the number of NDEs. And we call them medical experience, okay? And a lot of these people just really changed their lives completely. The experience of this NDE was so great that they went on a new career path. One of those is, what we got here? So ongoing, Bruce Grayson, I say, again, back to the Department of Sexual Studies, University of Virginia. This is where they collect. There's an international association needed their studies. There's a quarterly journal. And even Alexander was, again, he wrote a book called Proof of Heaven. He was a neurosurgeon and never believed in reincarnation or anything like that, but he had meningitis. He was in coma for a week. And then when he came back out of coma, he remembered so much, put into a book. He stopped practicing medicine as such, but was now a leading authority in this subject and is trying to promote a better understanding, shall we say. Okay, out-of-body experience, I won't go into that. I'm a little bit behind here. But out-of-body experiences are one of the typical experiences of a near-death patient. But also they can be induced, and there's a lot of research departments in universities helping people, exploring what consciousness can come from out of the body. People can actually travel out of the body. Now, according to Spiritism, we do this most nights when we dream or when we're semi-conscious, we can experience this. But it can be induced through meditation, through I can't remember, but biorhythms is a technique which help to promote that. But there's a lot of information and authentic study groups and courses you can actually take to facilitate, if you're interested in that sort of thing, to see what it does for you. I mentioned earlier about nature and nurture. Again, we're all made from those parents' DNA. We live in that environment, yet people are so different. Yeah? People are just so different. Children are so different. They all have their own personalities. Why? If you were purely materialistic, it's difficult to comprehend why. I'll say that. Child prodigies. You look back through history, there's been child prodigies since recorded time. I've just chosen 3 here from different aspects of society, but first one is Mozart. Okay, we're going back to the 1750s now, but he was playing the harpsichord at 3. He actually published music, wrote music and was published at 5. In his teens, concertos, sonatas, operas, symphonies, he could actually play the piano blindfolded, cross-handed. Can you imagine that? This guy's at 35, which was a pretty good old age back in the 1750s, but he wrote over 600 pieces. Yeah. Again, is it reincarnation on this planet alone that brought him to that existence, that reincarnation, with those abilities, or did he come from somewhere else? I mean, if you look at the spiritualist literature during the past times, Capella, there was an advanced society where they had some spirits that were not as advanced and were slowing the progress down. They immigrated into planet Earth, but they were at a high level. And so maybe some of these child prodigies from other more advanced worlds. Another one is Fermi, who's a scientist now. 10, he had a photographic memory, playing with geometric proofs. Doctorate at 21, won Nobel Prize for Physics, 1938. He was, 37 years old, which is young for a Nobel Prize winner. Fortunately, one of the things that he did help facilitate was the development of the atomic bomb. But that's history, right? That's part of society. And I just brought in somebody from the more artistic world, the Pablo Picasso. A painter, sculptor. I didn't know he was a printmaker, ceramicist, theatre set designer. And he was most prolific and influential artist of the 20th century, brought in different styles of art, visual arts, cubist, collage, and so on. Particularly prolific in many aspects of his personality, amazing character. universally known, and he's one of the few painters who actually made a fortune because his paintings were so famous when he was still alive. A lot of painters don't reap the benefits of their exceptional abilities. I can't show this, right? Unfortunately, I'll give you the reference afterwards. Child playing the piano at 2 years old, and at 6 he was playing in Carnegie Hall, and there's videos of it. Again, just Google child prodigies, and you'll find so many cases. Again, I'm just going back. This is what shows that we're not just born, we're not just created as a spirit when we're born in the human flesh. We've got this previous history of gaining intelligence, gaining in moral evolvement. Sorry, I can't do that. Okay, societal progress. When I was coming to this part, I confess we're living in such tumultuous times, let's be honest. But one must remember, you've got to look at a longer period, right? You can't, it's easy to look at 2, 3 years, 5 years ago, your childhood with these rose-tinted glasses and think, oh, it's much better then than it is now. Look at all these conflicts in the world, the COVID, the conflicts, the climate, the big C's. But if you look at a period of time from the human race, since as we talked about in our Genesis meeting today, human spirit has evolved with the physical body. So our history of living in a physical body that has the physical characteristics that enable us to express our intelligence, express our moral advancement, only happened a few thousand years ago. And if you look at the time of the progress, you go back to 1,000 years ago, we were barbarians, right? Interestingly, the United Nations have a sort of metric progress report every 4 years. And they talk about metrics like, infant mortality, access to drinking water, access to education, number of wars. Even though we're in this crazy situation in Ukraine now today, if you look at the number of deaths through wars over the period of mankind, it's been decreasing. So we're really living in the happiest times, the best times of the human race. But again, we tend to focus on, especially with the social media and so on today, we focus on the bad things, No newspaper said, oh, we took 10,000 young children out of poverty yesterday, which is true. This is literally the rate of young children increasing in the living standards. But that doesn't make the news, right? We'd rather hear of a shooting in wherever. So that's the priest. But again, so try and not just look at today. So this is from Genesis, chapter 33. The principle of reincarnation is a necessary consequence of the law of progress. Without reincarnation, how can one explain the difference between the present societal state and that of times of barbarism? If souls are created at the same time as the body, those being born today are as new and primitive as those who lived 1,000 years ago. Obviously not the case. Adding the fact that there would be no connection or necessary relationship between the two groups, so those created now and those created by the they will be completely independent of each other. Why then are souls today better endowed by God than those of his predecessors? That doesn't make sense, right? Why do they possess greater understanding? Why do they possess finer instincts and gentle customs? Why do they have an intuition about certain matters without having learned them? Why do they possess greater understanding? Why do they possess finer instincts and gentle customs? Why do they have an intuition about certain matters without having learned them? This dilemma is a challenge to solve if we are led to believe that God creates souls in different qualities according to the times and places, a proposition irreconcilable with the idea of supreme justice. And just to finish this off, on the contrary, if we would say that the souls of today have already lived in far-off times, it could have been barbaric in barbaric times, that have since progressed, that for each new existence they bring with them what they've acquired in previous lives, and that consequently the souls of civilized times are not souls created more perfect, but rather souls that have been perfecting themselves over time. Then you will have the only plausible explanation for the cause of social progress. And just finally, this is perhaps the most convincing of evidence in terms of, the reincarnation and the spiritual world. And I'm bringing up the two mediums. The most famous, of course, is Chico. had just minimum primary school education, started to show his mediumistic skills from a very early age. His first major work was a book of poems by deceased poets, and initially it was received with a lot of skepticism, but those who really analyzed the style of the prose and the wording and so forth really came to believe that it was from these poets, famous poets who had passed away. Psychographed amazing, more than 490 books, lots of letters which help people with spiritual readings and messages from past family members. And he never made any money out of this. He went to the Spiritual Federation of Brazil, which enabled them to sell Kardec's books and Chico's books at a very low price, and also help promulgate and disseminate Spiritism. In particular, noteworthy mention is André Louis, the series of 13 books that he psychographed by Dr. André Louis. And some of the medical knowledge and terms he brought out in those books were only proven 50 years further on. They were way ahead of the time. So, again, more proof of this spiritual connection. Again, Divaldo Franco still doing a fantastic charitable work in Bahia, in Brazil, Salvador. He's up to 220 books. He's 95 now, Andrew. Yeah. Not traveling as much these days, but he's been here in Miami and we've seen him. And of course, he was this. Oh yeah, this last one, channeling the spirit. This is amazing. In 2010, I think it was thereabouts, he was in the International Spiritist Federation meeting in Paris. And at the end of the meeting, he psychographed a message. And when he picked up a piece of paper, it was illegible. He couldn't read it. Turned it round, and it was the reverse image. So he actually psychographed in the reverse image. You can imagine that, but in French, which he didn't speak. And it was a message from the Denis. And there's a video, you can Google that. There's a video that shows that actually happening. So, I mean, again, more group pimples here. So he psychographed in the reverse image in a language he never spoke. If that's not proof of spiritual life. So I'm going to finish with the end of this same chapter 21. It reminds us a bit more about what reincarnation is all about. The knowledge about reincarnation implies responsibility instead of complacency, dynamic behavior instead of stagnation, since the person knows that his or her evolutionary process will be the product of personal choice. When this does not happen, the choice of values in line with the good, suffering sets in, followed by the urgent need for self-transformation, a personal, painful process that can and should be avoided. Said mechanism, reincarnation, enables the conquest of love, for it was elaborated by God, absolute love, to attract God's children towards the state of plenitude for which they have been destined. And the process of reincarnation begins when the sperm fertilizes the egg until the beginning of adolescence, when the complementary sexual characteristics set in. This I mentioned earlier. Therefore, the awareness of the fact that we're building the future is the right kind of stimulus to remain engaged in any kind of struggle. So we go back to the opening of Happy Days. Generating peace and joy of living. Thus, when dealing with any eventuality, we must carefully ponder the consequences, by which we will forget the heavy chains that bind us to painful capitulations, or we will sublimate the form, transforming it into an essence that will rise in the direction of freedom. Okay, so again, I've shown a lot of evidence, and I see it. Individually, perhaps not proof, but collectively, I think I believe in Spiritism. And you. So with that, I'll end my talk. I thank you. And I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you, David. In fact, there is a lot of that we have taught, and the reflection of those materials. So now we